A profound quiet descended the moment she left. It wasn't the kind of silence that follows a sudden absence, but a deep, resonant stillness that seemed to have been waiting for this exact moment. Moran's car pulled out of the driveway, the sound of the tires on the gravel fading into the distance like a half-remembered melody. I remained at the kitchen table, a sentinel to a cup of coffee that had grown cold. The steam, once a visible sign of warmth and life, had vanished, much like the affection in our marriage. "Just a weekend," she had said, her voice a practiced, soothing balm. "I need to find myself." But the words were a flimsy veil, and a husband, after years, learns to read between the lines. He knows the difference between a need for solitude and a need for escape. The preceding months had been a slow, insidious poison. Late nights at work that left no trace on her productivity, conversations that felt like passing ships in the night, and a phone always turned face down on the counter, a silent guardian of secrets. I had played the fool, convincing myself that the growing chasm between us was a product of my own paranoia. But as the last echoes of her car faded, a strange sensation bloomed in my chest. It wasn't the searing pain of betrayal, nor the gut-wrenching ache of abandonment. It was a quiet, almost sacred relief. In that moment, I understood the power dynamics of our relationship for what they were. For years, I had been the loyal dog, waiting patiently by the door, my fate in her hands. Moran believed she held all the cards, that she could embark on her little adventure, seek whatever thrill she craved, and return to find me exactly where she had left me. Unwavering, loyal, and waiting. She was wrong. The silence wasn't a void to be filled, but a canvas on which I could finally paint my own life. I wasn't waiting. I was done. And the man she would return to would be a stranger, forged in the quiet fire of her absence. The house, once a claustrophobic museum of her meticulous tastes, now felt expansive, breathable. I stood up, stretching muscles that had been tense for months. There should have been a storm of emotions, anger, pain, confusion. But all I felt was an overwhelming, almost spiritual sense of release. I walked into the bedroom, her domain. The closet door was ajar, revealing the space where her clothes once hung, now a hollow reminder of her departure. The faint scent of her perfume lingered on her unmade side of the bed, but it no longer felt like a ghost. It felt like a cleansing. I sat on the edge of the mattress, running my hands over my face. I had been living on autopilot, a ghost in my own home. My marriage had become an obligation, a daily chore to be endured rather than celebrated. I had been clinging to an illusion, a memory of a love that had long since died. A bitter chuckle escaped my lips. Moran had believed she was the one in control, the architect of our future, but she had underestimated the power of my own quiet desperation. She thought she was calling the shots, but in reality, she had simply given me the permission I had been too afraid to grant myself. I was already moving on. And by the time she came back, she would find that the home she had left behind was no longer hers. That first night alone was not what I had expected. I anticipated a gnawing loneliness, a heavy heart. Instead, the house felt like a vacant hotel room I had checked out of without knowing. The silence was not oppressive. It was a companion. I walked through the living room, my gaze falling on a framed wedding photo on the mantel. The two people in the picture, frozen in a moment of youthful hope, seemed like strangers. I picked it up, my finger tracing the smiling face of the woman I barely recognized anymore, or perhaps had never truly known. I turned it face down, a silent, symbolic act of severing ties with a past that was no longer mine. When I reached the bedroom, a strange hesitation gripped me. It felt like entering a foreign country. So I turned and went to the guest room. It was smaller, simpler, unadorned. But for the first time in years, I slept without the silent pressure of another person's presence. There were no expectations, no hushed anxiety, no subtle glances to see if the person beside me was awake, scrolling through her phone. There was just peace. The next morning, I woke with the dawn, a lightness in my chest I hadn't felt in years. It was Saturday, A day that had once been an intricate dance of Moran's schedules and demands. Now, it was a blank page. I brewed a strong cup of coffee and sat on the back porch, watching the world awaken. Birds chirped, cars hummed in the distance, and life in all its mundane glory moved on. I picked up my phone, a habit born of years of checking for a text that never came. But today, the habit felt broken. Instead of checking for a message from Moran, I found myself scrolling to a name I hadn't seen in years, Angela. We had been close once, before the demands of a new marriage and Moran's subtle, deliberate distancing had slowly pushed her out of my life. I hovered over the call button, a flicker of apprehension. Would it be weird after all this time? Then I remembered. I didn't owe Moran anything. I pressed the button. The ring echoed twice before a familiar voice answered. Joel? Wow, this is a surprise. A genuine smile touched my lips. Yeah, it's been a while. A soft laugh followed. It really has. Just like that, the weekend Moran thought would be a pause in our life became a prelude to a new one. I spent the morning catching up with Angela. It was surreal, hearing her voice again, talking to someone who knew the man I had been before I became a shadow of myself. We talked about everything, work, travel, the people we had lost touch with. When she asked me what was new, I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. My wife left for the weekend to explore something new. A pause, then a sharp, knowing laugh. Let me guess. She expects you to just wait for her to come back like nothing happened. I exhaled, a silent acknowledgement of the bitter truth. That's the thing. I don't think I care if she comes back at all. The line went silent for a second before she spoke again, her voice soft. Joel, I don't think you realize how huge that is. Maybe she was right. Without even consciously knowing it, I had already let go. After we hung up, I walked through the house with a new set of eyes. It wasn't a home. It was a perfectly curated set for a performance of a marriage that had been empty for years. The sleek, modern furniture, the neutral colors, the pristine arrangements, all of it felt like a carefully constructed lie. The house smelled of lavender and vanilla, her signature scents, but for the first time, it felt artificial. I ran my hand over the marble counter where she used to sit, pretending to listen to me talk about my day. How many times had I convinced myself she was just tired? How many times had I ignored the gnawing feeling that she had mentally checked out long before she physically walked out the door? Too many. I pulled the old stereo from the closet, a relic Moran had deemed an eyesore. I turned up the volume, filling the sterile silence with music I loved. Music that made me feel something. I leaned against the counter, letting the sound wash over me. For the first time in years, the house felt like mine. My phone buzzed, a text from Moran. Hey, hope you're doing okay. Won't have service for a while. Talk soon. A perfunctory placeholder, a subtle way to keep me on the hook while she pursued her own desires. She still thought I was waiting. I smirked and typed a reply. Enjoy your weekend. No questions, no desperation, just a simple, detached sentence that held a world of finality. That night, I took off my wedding ring. It wasn't a dramatic act. I simply removed it and placed it on the nightstand. The empty space on my finger felt not like a loss, but like a release. Sunday night arrived, a strange culmination of quiet reflection and liberation. The weekend had been mine, and I wasn't afraid of the silence anymore. But then, the familiar hum of tires on the driveway cut through the quiet. Moran was back. I didn't move from the couch. I just sat, waiting for the moment to pass, for her to become just a person walking into a life that no longer belonged to her. The door clicked open. Her heels clacked against the hardwood floor. I finally turned and met her eyes. She looked surprised, as if she had expected to find me waiting with a desperate question on my lips. I'm back, she said, her voice a little too bright. I see that, I replied, taking a sip of bourbon. The silence that followed was heavy with her unspoken expectations. She set her bag down, her eyes scanning the room, searching for a sign of the man she had left. She found none. "You okay?" she asked, her voice cautious. "I really am," I said, a quiet chuckle escaping me. And that was the moment I saw it, the flash of realization in her eyes. This wasn't the reaction she had anticipated. She had come home to a man who had already moved on. She sat across from me at the kitchen island, a nervous energy about her. "This weekend was eye-opening," she began, a rehearsed excuse for her betrayal. She spoke of needing to figure things out, of seeing if what she felt was real. I listened, a weary smile on my lips. I knew she had spent the weekend with someone else. But hearing her dance around the truth, her carefully chosen words designed to soften the blow, was almost comical. "And what did you figure out?" I asked calmly. She looked up, finally meeting my gaze. "I still want this, us. I don't want to throw away everything we've built." I stood up, grabbing my glass, and walked to the sink. I took my time rinsing it out, letting her words hang in the air. When I turned back to face her, my expression was calm, resolute. "You didn't just take a trip, Moran. You made a choice." A breath hitched in her throat. "Joel." "I spent the weekend thinking too," I cut her off. "And I realized something. I don't want this anymore." Her face fell, a flicker of panic in her eyes. "You're just saying that because you're hurt." I shook my head. "No. I'm saying it because I finally understand something. I deserve better than a wife who sees our marriage as a thing she can put on pause whenever she feels like it." The silence that followed was profound. In it, I saw fear. Not the fear of losing me, but the fear of losing the comfortable, stable life she had taken for granted. "You're serious," she whispered. I nodded. "I'm done waiting. By the time you walked back through that door, I had already moved on." Her expression shifted from shock to a cold resentment. "So that's it? You're just throwing it all away?" I let out a quiet laugh. "No, Moran. You did that the second you walked out that door." Her eyes flashed with frustration, but she didn't have a response. She lingered, hoping I would change my mind. But I didn't. When she finally grabbed her bag and walked out the door again, I didn't watch her go. I was already looking forward. The weight of her presence still lingered in the air, a faint trace of her perfume, a ghost of her heels on the hardwood floor. But I felt nothing. No sadness, no regret. Just an overwhelming sense of finality. I understood now. I had been clinging to an illusion, a marriage that had been dead for years. I grabbed my keys, slipped on my jacket, and walked outside. The air was crisp, the pavement slick with recent rain. I took a deep breath and started walking. No destination, no plan, just movement. I wasn't thinking about her. I wasn't waiting for answers that no longer mattered. I was just existing, and it felt like a miracle. Half an hour later, I found myself standing in front of Angela's door. My body had known where to go before my mind had. Before I could overthink it, I knocked. She opened the door, her expression a mix of surprise and curiosity. "Joel, what are you doing here?" she asked, stepping aside. "Honestly," I said, shoving my hands in my pockets, "I don't know." She studied me for a moment, then ushered me inside. Her apartment was the opposite of my house, warm, lived in, filled with books and a soft jazz tune humming from a record player. She handed me a glass of whiskey, and we sat on the couch in a comfortable, understanding silence. "So," she finally said, "the wife's back." I smirked, shaking my head. "Not for long." Her eyebrow arched, but she didn't press. I told her what had happened, how Moran had returned and how I had finally let her go. She thought she could just walk back in like nothing happened, I said, a dry chuckle escaping me. They always do, Angela replied, a knowing look in her eyes. So what now? She asked, her voice gentle. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Now, I said, the words feeling right and true. I start over. She raised her glass in a silent toast, and I clinked mine against hers. For the first time in years, I felt it. Hope. Real, tangible hope. And maybe, just maybe, the best part of my life was only just beginning. I woke up the next morning feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Light. For years, I had been carrying the weight of a marriage that had been crumbling under its own neglect. I had let myself believe that love meant endurance, that commitment meant sacrifice, even when I was the only one making them. But now, I felt free. I sat up in Angela's guest room, a modest, simple space that felt more like a home than my own house ever had. I got up, ran a hand through my hair, and stepped into the hallway. The smell of fresh coffee hit me before I even made it to the kitchen. Angela was there, already awake, leaning against the counter with a steaming mug in her hands. She glanced at me and smirked. "Morning, stranger." "Morning," I chuckled, taking the cup she offered. We stood there, sipping coffee, the silence between us not awkward but companionable. "So, how do you feel?" she asked. I thought about it, really thought about it. Then I smiled. Like I just got my life back. Angela nodded, a knowing glint in her eyes. It was good. I wasn't looking at my past with regret. I wasn't thinking about what I had lost. I was thinking about what came next. Moran hadn't been my future. She had been a lesson in knowing when to let go, a lesson in choosing myself. And as I stood there drinking coffee in a home that wasn't mine, I finally understood. Home wasn't a place. It wasn't a house filled with expensive furniture, forced smiles, and unspoken resentments. Home was peace. And for the first time in years, I had finally found it.